This is Natalie Holloway. She went missing on May 30th, 2005, while on a senior trip to Aruba. Now, on this trip, her and her friends were partying and drinking the whole time. They said Natalie was pretty much drunk from the morning till the night, because the legal age of drinking there is 18. The morning when they were leaving to go to the airport, they couldn't find Natalie. They checked her hotel room. All of her luggage was packed, and her passport was on the nightstand, but she was nowhere to be seen. The last time anyone saw her was when she was getting in a car with 3 men. These 3 men were Ellerin van der Sloot, who was 17 at the time, and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo, who were 21 and 18. After they reported Natalie missing, they obviously went and tracked down these 3 men. And in questioning, all of their stories didn't match up. They were all saying different things, saying they dropped her off at the beach, we dropped her off at the hotel. It was very confusing. These men were arrested and questioned several times throughout this investigation, but the main suspect was Ellerin. The search for Natalie was very extensive. This case became a whole media frenzy. People in Aruba were let off work early so they could help find Natalie during the day. There were Marines searching the shores and the coastline, helicopters flying around using infrared to try and find her body, and her parents flew down to Aruba to also help. And they spent over $3 million to find her. Natalie's body was never recovered. We still to this day have no idea what happened to her or where she is. No concrete proof of any of this. Back to Ellerin. He confessed and testified, like I said, several times. One time he was saying, oh, she started having convulsions. There were rumors that she died of alcohol poisoning or drug poisoning, and that she just went unconscious. They couldn't revive her. There was another time where he said he was dropping her off at the beach and accidentally dropped her head on a rock, and she died immediately on impact. But none of these made sense. He ended up telling Beth Holloway, Natalie's mother, that he knew where the body was, but he wanted money for it. So Beth paid Ellerin $25,000 up front and said she would wire him money in installments after they had found the body. After looking where he said it was, there was nothing there. And he had fled to Peru. In Peru, he murdered a 21-year-old girl named Stephanie Flores. He killed her because he was doing drugs and got paranoid that Stephanie was part of the FBI trying to get information about Natalie out of him, so he strangled her to death. He confessed to this and is spending 28 years in prison in Peru. He also has charges of extortion and wire fraud in America. So after those 28 years, he'll be coming right over here to receive those punishments. But still, we have no idea what happened.
Have you guys heard about the men who went fishing and then vanished for 14 months? On November 17th, 2012, 36-year-old Salvador Ebarenga and 22-year-old Ezekiel Cordova left the coast of Mexico in a boat for a 2-day fishing trip. Both men were aware that there was a storm on the way, but they went anyways because Salvador claimed that he had experienced fishing in these conditions. As both men were finishing up with their fishing trip, they began to make their way back to the shore, but the waves were so big that it flooded their engine and it stopped working, so their boat began to float into the Pacific Ocean. The storm was so aggressive that it shook the boat and caused their fish to be thrown overboard, as well as their net and all their tools. An entire week went by without both men drinking water until finally it rained and they were able to quench their thirst. They went days without eating, drinking water, and with the severe heat, it all caused hallucinations. In order to survive, Salvador caught turtles, sharks, and birds with his hands, and they also drank turtle blood for energy. 6 to 10 weeks go by, and on this day, both men catch 2 birds each to eat, and when Ezekiel starts eating his bird, he becomes really sick and starts to throw up, and that's when Salvador cuts open the bird and he finds a yellow poisonous snake. After that traumatic incident, Ezekiel refused to eat any more raw meat because he feared getting sick again. Eventually, Ezekiel passed away from starvation, and Salvador didn't realize that he was speaking to a corpse until almost a week later. Salvador continued his journey alone in the ocean for an entire year. But on January 29, 2014, his boat had drifted 6,000 miles at this point and he landed on the shore of Marshall Island. Salvador was finally saved, making him the longest a person has survived in the ocean. But the story doesn't end there. You see, when Salvador was rescued, he did look weak and tired, but many people questioned if he really was in the ocean for over a year. Based on his appearance, Salvador was not as thin as someone would be had he been in the ocean for that long. Ezekiel's family even accused Salvador of cannibalism, and they truly think that he took the young boy's life for his own consumption. Unfortunately, we will never know what happened on that boat between both men, but what do you guys think?
Here's a celebrity true crime story. On the night of February 21st, 2001, Ashton Kutcher was getting ready for a date with 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin. They were both newly single and had mutual friends. This was their first date. He arrived at Ashley's apartment pretty late, but she didn't open the door. He assumed that she was mad because he was late and had gone out without him, so he left and went home. The following morning, Ashley was found deceased by her roommate. She had been stabbed 47 times. The murderer was found to be serial killer Michael Gargiulo. He had been arrested for attempting to kill another woman in 2008. He would stalk women who lived near him, break into their homes, and viciously attack them. Ashton testified at the trial and Gargiulo was found guilty. He was sentenced to the death penalty in July 2021.
The girl that survived being held captive for 18 years. In 1991, 11-year-old JC Lee Dugard was snatched on her way to school. JC's stepdad was actually watching her walk to the school bus and watched the horror unfold. She was dragged in broad daylight into a vehicle by a man and a woman. Her stepdad immediately tried racing after the vehicle on his bike, but it was too late. While JC's poor stepdad was incorrectly being accused of being somehow involved in this, JC was being held by Philip and Nancy Garrido. Philip had actually previously been in prison for kidnap, but was let out after 11 years. The pair held JC in a tiny little shed in the garden, only 200 miles away from her home. Philip would regularly come and violate her in the shed against her will and then cry to her for forgiveness. JC ended up giving birth to her first child when she was just a child herself at 14. She had another child by this absolute monster at the age of 17. Philip actually started letting JC have a little bit more freedom and would let her out to do things with her daughters. However, due to the psychological abuse and manipulation that he'd put JC through, she was far too scared to ask anyone for help. In 2009, Philip started saying to people that he believed he was a servant of God. He went to the University of California to ask the police department there if he could hold a special event. He'd actually taken JC's two daughters to see these police officers, and they started getting a little bit concerned and felt like something was off. Luckily, they decided to do a background check on him and discovered his criminal past. They were extremely concerned that he was with these two young girls. When they questioned him, he eventually ended up confessing everything. At this point, after 18 years, JC is finally free of this hell she's been living in. She's now actually an author and has written 2 books about her personal experiences.
Did you know that a man literally got possessed and was able to summon rain? Yeah, you heard me right. His name was Donald Decker, and this is his story. It all starts with the death of his abusive grandfather. Decker was in prison at the time at the age of 21 years old and was let out for 7 days on furlough to be with his family and attend the funeral. He saw the funeral as a great chance to find peace from the past and move on from the trauma that his grandfather caused him. And as the casket was going down into the ground, he thought to himself, wow, this chapter in my life is really over. But little did he know, it was just getting started. Things were about to get really, really strange for Donald Decker. He was staying with his friends Bob and Jeannie Kiefer, and at dinner after the funeral, Decker began to feel really, really ill. The Kiefers suggested that he go upstairs and turn in for the night, but he excused himself to the bathroom. And that's when it started. The temperature in the bathroom suddenly dropped below freezing, and Decker felt scratching pain on his arm and watched as 3 bloody marks appeared. He walked out of the bathroom, and the best way that his friends could describe him was as being in a comatose or trance-like state. Physical touch, spoken words, nothing worked to break Decker out of this weird trance he suddenly fell into. And it started. It began with water dripping down the walls and then a cool mist forming around Decker on the floor. And then it started raining. one droplet at a time, until inside the keeper's house, it was raining. Needless to say, they freaked out and called their landlord, who arrived and said, "This isn't a plumbing issue. You're in the front of the house. There are no pipes here." So immediately, the police were called. Donald Decker got possessed, and he was known as the Rain Man. Well, things started to get really, really strange after the landlord called the police. The police said, "It really is raining in here," because it was. It was raining inside of a house. And they said, "Okay, Keepers, Decker, you're gonna go to a restaurant, get some air, figure out what's going on." As soon as Decker left the property, the rain stopped. It was the oddest thing. Well, Decker, who was now out of his trance, and the Keepers ended up at Pam Scrufano's restaurant, and she insisted that Decker was possessed by something very sinister and evil. And again, like a light was switched in his brain, Decker went back into a trance-like state, and that's when the rain started in Pam's restaurant. Pam was completely freaked out, as anyone would be. She rushed into her office and grabbed a crucifix and placed it onto Decker, who seemed to have been burnt by it and recoiled back. That's how horror movies start. I don't know about you guys, but I would have noped right out of that restaurant and left Decker to be possessed on his own. But for some reason, the Keepers brought Decker back to their house, and the landlord started yelling at them, saying, "You're damaging my property on purpose. What is wrong with you?" This is when Decker lifts into the air and flies backwards into one of the police officers. He lands on top of the crucifix that the officer was wearing and burns himself again. At this point, every official involved was like, "This is way past my pay grade. Let's call our chief." The chief did not believe them that any of this was going on and ordered everyone to stay away from Decker and stay away from the scene. He thought that they were just making all this up and it was all fake and fictional, which I don't blame him. It sounds fictional. The possession of Donald Decker gave him the name the Rain Man for very specific reasons. So after the police chief told everyone to leave and not to return back, even if 911 was called, a few lone officers who were curious about the incident returned. It was a good thing they did, because Decker was in a horrendous state. He had claw marks all over his neck, and as soon as they showed up, he was again picked up into the air and thrown back violently. Eventually, a priest was called, and after copious amounts of prayer and whatever else priests do, he seemed to heal a little bit and was able to go back to prison after his 7-day furlough. But it doesn't end there. Even though he was no longer possessed, Decker found that he could still summon rain if he concentrated hard enough. He was already back in prison when he discovered this, and he told people, he told everyone, and the guards mocked him and they were like, "You can't really summon rain, but just for it, we're gonna bring you to the warden's office." And they all began to taunt him and tell him, "Well, if you can really summon rain, then do it." Because of course everyone had heard the story about what happened when he went to the Kiefer's house, and he did it. Suddenly, the guards and the warden in the warden's own office were drenched through with water. No one doubted him after that. To this day, Decker adamantly believes that it was his grandfather that possessed him, coming back from beyond the grave to abuse him more. Isn't that wonderful? Well, I believe it. What do you guys think really happened? Was Donald Decker, the Rain Man, really possessed, or was something a little more peculiar at play here? Let me know in the comments.